Thank you, Dr. Nitschwicki. Our next presenter was already a little bit introduced by Dr. Nitschwicki herself. It's Dr. Matthias Rath. He's an international renowned scientist, a physician. He's a health promoter. He's the founder of the scientific concept of cellular medicine, which was introduced by Dr. Nitschwicki, which offers us a new understanding of health and disease that identifies nutritional deficiencies at the cellular level as the root cause of many chronic diseases. And he also established our Dr. Rath Health Research Institute to conduct innovative research, which is based on scientific discoveries in heart disease and cancer. And Dr. Rath is a member of the New York Academy of Sciences, the American Heart Association, and other scientific professional organizations. And today he will introduce a new approach for cardiovascular health, which is based on his unifying concept of the cause of heart disease, which expand beyond high blood cholesterol level as a key risk factor.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the kind words of introduction. But I see myself not as the big man I've been introduced to, rather than as a fermenter, someone who passes on important information, particularly to the next generation. And so I'm glad to see a lot of young people here who came in the expectation to hear something new. Some of them already understand that what you learn in medical school today or in other faculties of life sciences cannot be the truth, because otherwise many of the diseases that haunt mankind in epidemic proportions would not be around. So I hope we can inspire you tonight to think new ways and to go them with us, or for yourself. Today is an important day. We will be talking about the control of cardiovascular disease, the #1 cause of death in this city, in this country, and in many parts of the world. The solution to cardiovascular disease is not a new pharmaceutical drug. It is a new understanding about the true cause of this health problem. The key to the control of any disease is prevention. Among the leading universities of the world, the Medical School of Maastricht takes great pride in being prevention-oriented. And this is one of the reasons why this important event takes place in the city of Maastricht. This is the dimension of the cardiovascular epidemic. Today, at the beginning of the 21st century, every third person in the world dies from heart attacks and strokes. And despite all media hype about the alleged impact of pharmaceutical drugs, the global cardiovascular epidemic continues. And it continues relentlessly. There is an important law in medicine. Any epidemic can continue only as long as its true cause is not understood. And as long as we don't understand the nature of a disease, we cannot develop specific approaches to prevent or to treat it. The epidemic of heart attacks and strokes is no exception. And how could we accept the current dogmas of cardiovascular disease if they cannot explain the most basic questions of cardiology? For example, why do we get infarctions of the heart, but rarely of other organs like the nose or the ear? Why do we get arteriosclerosis but not venosclerosis? Why do animals not get heart attacks but we people do? The prevailing dogma of cardiovascular disease wants to make us believe that high levels of cholesterol circulating in the bloodstream damage the inside of the blood vessel lining, thereby initiating the buildup of the dangerous arteriosclerotic plaques. But this theory cannot explain why these plaques develop primarily within the few centimeters of the coronary arteries of the heart, while the miles of blood vessels pipeline in the rest of the body remain largely unaffected. A plumber knows that if the water quality within a pipeline is bad, the pipeline deteriorates along its entire length and not just in a few spots. Thus, basic human logic already excludes high cholesterol as the primary cause of heart attacks and strokes. If high cholesterol levels in the bloodstream were to be blamed for the buildup of the arteriosclerotic plaques, these obstructions of blood flow would have to occur at the same rate in arteries and in veins. This is clearly not the case. While arteriosclerosis is common, venosclerosis is unknown. This observation, too, excludes cholesterol as the primary culprit of cardiovascular disease. Perhaps the most striking unanswered question of cardiology today is the fact that heart attacks and strokes are essentially unknown in the animal world. Before we come to provide answers to these striking questions, let's first have a look back at some of the milestones in mankind's effort to identify the nature, the true nature of cardiovascular disease. At the end of medieval times, Leonardo da Vinci drew the first anatomical pictures of the coronary arteries riding on top of the heart. These arteries had escaped previous research because, in order to make them visible, the outer skin of the heart, the pericardium, has to be removed. Shortly thereafter, the Spanish physician and theologist Michael Servetus published the first description of blood circulating between the heart and the lungs. In 1553, Servetus was burned at the stake as a heretic. And half a millennium later, this pioneer of medicine and physiology is being commemorated for his contributions to science the world over. Arguably, the first description of arteriosclerosis in coronary arteries was published by Adam Thebesius. In his 1716 textbook of medicine, he wrote, "The branches of the larger coronary arteries are completely osseous, which means calcified, a characteristic description of the advanced stages of arteriosclerosis." As noteworthy as the observation by this German anatomist itself was the fact that his pioneering book was published in the Dutch city of Leiden. This was no coincidence. Throughout the past centuries, the state of the Netherlands had been a center of scientific advances and progressive intellectual thinking. In the 19th century, Rudolf Virchow and others contributed much to identify the cellular origin of cardiovascular and other diseases. But the true nature of arteriosclerotic plaques remained elusive. During the 20th century, research turned to the composition of the arteriosclerotic plaque. It was thought that its major components are so-called low-density lipoproteins, in short LDL, or commonly also known as the bad cholesterol. These particles are essentially composed of a lipid globule containing cholesterol, triglycerides, and other fat molecules, and the protein called apolipoprotein B100. ApoB100 renders the shape to the lipoprotein particle and is also responsible for the docking of LDL molecules to the so-called LDL receptor on the surface of cells. For the identification of this docking mechanism, two scientists, Joseph Goldstein and Michael Brown, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1985. But no one seemed to bother that the genetic defects associated with this discovery, the LDL receptor defect, could at best explain 5% of heart attacks and strokes. Thus, being simply unable to account for the cardiovascular epidemic at large. While the scientific contributions of these two scientists did not contribute much to the elucidation of the nature of cardiovascular disease, it certainly contributed to something else. For the past quarter of a century, the dogma that cholesterol and LDL are the primary risk factors of arteriosclerosis was used by the pharmaceutical industry to build up a multi-billion global market with cholesterol-lowering drugs, namely the statins. The global annual sales of statins alone has almost reached the staggering amount of $40 billion each year. Not surprisingly, even a quarter of a century after the introduction of statins, the cardiovascular epidemic still continues on a global scale. Worse, according to international forecasts, heart attacks and strokes will increase by more than a quarter until the year 2030. Considering these facts, there is an urgent need to identify new mechanisms that can explain the true nature of human cardiovascular disease. Our research over the past 2 decades has shown that a fascinating molecule leads the way to the solution of the puzzle of human cardiovascular disease. Its name is lipoprotein a. And, as one can easily detect, it has a striking similarity to the LDL particle we already know. But it is the difference between these two molecules that is critical here. Lipoprotein A differs from LDL because of a decisive feature: the association of an extremely large protein on the surface of the LDL molecule. This surface protein is known as ApoA, and it binds to the LDL molecule during the assembly process in the liver. The ApoA molecule is not only one of the largest molecules in nature, but also one of the stickiest. This adhesive molecule has a striking structural homology to plasminogen, one of the most important molecules in the process of blood clot formation and dissolution. Because of this unique structure, the lipoprotein A molecule, as opposed to LDL, easily binds to fibrinogen and fibrin, to collagen and other connective tissue components, as well as to endothelial cells, which form the cellular barrier between the bloodstream and the artery wall. Already 3 decades ago, together with my colleagues at the University of Hamburg, we established that lipoprotein A, not LDL, is the primary fat-transporting constituent of human atherosclerotic plaques. As you can see on this histological cross-section through a human atherosclerotic plaque, wherever we found markers for LDL, we also found the sticky ApoA molecule, proving the presence of lipoprotein A. In other words, earlier researchers had missed to look for the additional ApoA molecule and therefore had wrongly concluded that LDL molecules are the primary constituent of atherosclerotic plaques. Our studies also established that the more advanced the atherosclerotic process was, the more lipoprotein A molecules were deposited inside these plaques. Even though our results were published in the journals of the American Heart Association and the European Society of Cardiology, they were largely ignored. This neglect was mainly due to the fact that, as opposed to LDL levels, there was no pharmaceutical drug available that would lower lipoprotein A plasma levels. Today, 3 decades later, this situation has changed, and lipoprotein A has been confirmed as the primary risk factor for all known forms of cardiovascular disease. Lipoprotein A is a leading independent risk factor for coronary artery disease and heart attacks, for cerebrovascular disease and strokes, for peripheral vascular disease, for restenosis after bypass surgery, and angioplasty, as well as other cardiovascular conditions. We have documented some of these studies on the website of this symposium. In 2010, more than 2 decades after our initial publications about lipoprotein A as the primary component of human atherosclerotic plaques, the European Society of Cardiology recommended blood measurement for elevated lipoprotein A in those patients at intermediate or high cardiovascular disease risk. Thus, while lipoprotein A is now firmly established as a leading risk factor for human cardiovascular disease, the significance of this unique molecule is still not well understood. A discovery I made in 1987 should turn out to be the first step towards an answer. It was known by that time that lipoprotein A was only found in humans and subhuman primates, but essentially not in other animal species. But nobody had discovered that there existed an inverse relation between lipoprotein A and vitamin C. Animals that generally produce vitamin C in their own body do not manufacture lipoprotein A. Vice versa, we humans are unable to synthesize vitamin C in our body and instead express lipoprotein A. This inverse relation between lipoprotein A and vitamin C was no coincidence. It was a principle of nature that would ultimately lead the way to the new understanding of cardiovascular disease. In 1990, I published this discovery together with Nobel laureate Linus Pauling in the Proceedings of the US National Academy of Sciences. Lipoprotein A is a surrogate for ascorbate. Ascorbate is the scientific name for vitamin C. There are 2 ways to stabilize the connective tissue and particularly the stability in the artery walls. Vitamin C is essential for the production of collagen molecules, the stability structures in our body. Animals producing high amounts of vitamin C in their bodies produce an optimum amount of collagen, enough to keep their artery walls protected and stable. We humans, having lost the ability to produce vitamin C in our body during evolution and frequently getting too little vitamin C in our diet, are prone to insufficient production and function of collagen reinforcement molecules. Thus, over time, millions of cracks and crevices develop along the artery walls and repair becomes necessary. In this situation, lipoprotein A functions as a mobile repair molecule with 2 valuable features. Firstly, an extremely large biological adhesive tape, the ApoA molecule, for instant repair. And secondly, cholesterol and other lipid molecules as essential substrates for the growth of new cells within the area of repair. We now have identified the nature of the lipoprotein A molecule. It is a mobile repair molecule in the blood that uses LDL as a transport vehicle to reach the site of tissue repair. The adhesive ApoA molecule is a substitute for collagen in the vascular wall whenever it is injured or structurally impaired, notably during long-term vitamin C deficiency. The lipoprotein A molecule is initially a life-saving repair factor for the artery wall, especially when it is weakened by dietary deficiency in vitamins and other micronutrients. But if this repair process continues for too long, it overshoots, resulting in the formation of the atherosclerotic plaques. Let us now compare this new understanding of human cardiovascular disease with the existing concept. According to the old concept, LDL molecules enter the artery wall and deposit cholesterol and other fat molecules there. This process serves no biological purpose and therefore is essentially an arbitrary or random event, a fatalistic event. Moreover, in this old concept, the atherosclerotic plaque is essentially irreversible. In contrast, our new understanding shows that mainly intact lipoprotein A particles are deposited inside the artery walls. Their deposition inside the vascular walls protects these walls against blood loss through a structurally impaired wall, as it occurs during vitamin C deficiency and in its extreme scurvy. Therefore, arteriosclerosis is not an arbitrary development rather than the result of a defined regulatory process of nature. Most importantly, the formation of arteriosclerotic plaques is in principle reversible by an optimum intake of micronutrients. We tested the principal reversibility of cardiovascular disease in a clinical study using ultra-fast computed tomography of coronary arteries. These two pictures show the first clinical documentation of the natural reversal of human coronary artery disease with micronutrients. The left-hand picture shows arteriosclerotic deposits in the left coronary artery of a 51-year-old patient. After 1 year on a defined micronutrient program, the deposits are no longer detectable, as you can see on the right-hand side. In the meantime, many clinical and epidemiological studies have confirmed the value of vitamin C and other micronutrients in the prevention and control of cardiovascular disease. Here are just two examples. An analysis of 18 clinical studies with almost 250,000 participants showed that high vitamin C blood levels resulted in a 38% reduction in the risk for stroke. This study was published in the Journal of the American Heart Association in 2013. A second study evaluated almost 300,000 people over 10 years. Vitamin C intake above 700 milligrams per day resulted in a 25% decrease of cardiovascular risk. The website of this symposium documents many more results from clinical studies as well as basic research with micronutrients. We can now summarize our new understanding about the nature of cardiovascular disease in a way that can be understood even in the elementary schools of the world. Cardiovascular disease does not start with elevated cholesterol levels damaging the artery walls. It starts with a structural impairment of the artery wall characterized by gaps between the endothelial cells and the structural impairment of the connective tissue making up the artery walls. The most common condition, of course, causing these changes is a long-term deficiency of vitamins. With long-term dietary vitamin deficiency and the imminent development of scurvy, lipoprotein A particles enter the blood vessel wall through widening intercellular gaps. Millions of these lipoprotein A molecules are deposited then inside the artery wall in order to mend the injuries and prevent fatal blood loss, the inevitable endpoint of scurvy. With an optimum dietary intake of vitamins and other micronutrients, sufficient connective tissue is produced to induce the healing process of the artery wall. In this situation, the repair function of lipoprotein A is no longer needed, and the lipoprotein A molecules are gradually released from the blood vessel walls, thereby decreasing or completely dissolving the arteriosclerotic plaque. On the basis of this new understanding of cardiovascular disease, we can now answer all key questions of cardiology that thus far had remained open. We get infarctions of the heart, but rarely of other organs, because the mechanical stress of the pumping heart exposes the underlying structural impairment of the vitamin-deficient artery wall. We get arteriosclerosis, but not venosclerosis, because the blood pressure in the arteries exposes, again, the underlying structural impairment of the vascular wall. And as opposed to humans, animals do not get heart attacks because they produce their own vitamin C, resulting in an optimum production of collagen and an intact, protected vascular wall. In order to prove this new understanding of cardiovascular disease beyond any doubt, there was only one way. Our research team had to create an animal model that mimics, copies human atherosclerosis with respect to its inability to synthesize vitamin C and, at the same time, to produce human-derived lipoprotein A in this animal model. This unique animal model allowed us to study the two decisive questions that would confirm our new understanding of cardiovascular disease beyond any doubt. First, does long-term deficiency of vitamin C in the diet without the addition of dietary cholesterol or fat, lead to the formation of atherosclerotic plaques? And second, does human lipoprotein A accumulate inside the artery walls impaired by long-term vitamin C deficiency? And here is the answer to the first question. Arteriosclerotic plaques develop as a result of long-term dietary vitamin C deficiency. The picture on the left-hand side here shows a histological section through arteries of an animal on vitamin C deficient diet. The atherosclerotic plaques, here marked with black arrows, are clearly visible. And just like in the human system, just like in human atherosclerosis, they develop at the branching regions of the arteries, where blood flow turbulences and mechanical stress expose the underlying impairment, the underlying weakness of the vascular wall. In contrast, on the right-hand side, you can see arteries of an animal that had received a diet high in vitamin C. The connective tissue is intact, and no atherosclerotic plaques are detectable. These experiments unequivocally confirm that atherosclerosis is an early form of the sailor's disease, scurvy. The other decisive question was whether lipoprotein A molecules would compensate for vitamin C deficiency inside the artery walls. Again, the left-hand side of this picture documents the beginnings of atherosclerotic lesions in an animal on low vitamin C diet. Like in early scurvy, the connective tissue of the artery is starting to disintegrate. And in parallel now, human-derived lipoprotein A, marked with brown color, has entered the vascular wall in an attempt to compensate for the structural impairment and to mend the wall. The right-hand side shows the artery walls of an animal on high vitamin C diet. The connective tissue structures are intact, and essentially no lipoprotein A is detectable. These experiments confirm the concept that lipoprotein A functions as a surrogate, as a replacement for vitamin C inside the artery wall, eventually contributing, of course, to the buildup of atherosclerotic plaques if this process overshoots. We can now also explain the fact that lipoprotein A has become a hallmark of human metabolism, while it's only found in humans and subhuman primates, while essentially being absent in lower living species. From the sailors of earlier centuries, we know that since they were unable to produce vitamin C in their bodies and were running out of fresh foods on board their ships, they died after about 4 months from hemorrhagic blood loss through the scorbutic blood vessel walls. Let's now imagine for a moment our ancestors who experienced nutritional scarcity for thousands of generations. For example, during the tens of thousands of years of an ice age. Almost all newborns and children died of scurvy, unless they had inherited metabolic factors able to mend the scorbutic vascular wall during extended periods of micronutrient deficiency and scurvy. The most important and most efficient repair molecule we already know, lipoprotein A. The presence of lipoprotein A in the gene pool of our ancestors may have determined life and death for them. Those among our ancestors who did not carry the metabolic feature of lipoprotein A died during childhood from scorbutic blood loss. Those among our ancestors who did carry lipoprotein A in their metabolism had the chance to survive childhood. Later, they would have children on their own, thereby passing on the genes for the lipoprotein A molecule to the next generation. Now we understand why lipoprotein A became a metabolic hallmark of us humans and our ancestors. Perhaps the most exciting aspect is the following. For the first time in the history of medicine, an animal model is available that mimics a genetic switch that took place during evolution. The loss of vitamin C production and the appearance of lipoprotein A. From genetic analysis, we know that this switch took place in the ancestor of man about the same time, about 40 million years ago. Think about it. With this animal model, the international research community, in fact, whole mankind, can now study the most critical metabolic steps in its own evolution. Many more questions about human diseases can be studied with the help of this new and unique animal model. We have patented this mouse model not with the goal to enrich ourselves, but to preserve it for all mankind to study. We offer this mouse model free of charge for a research project at the University of Maastricht and other public universities and research institutions for the study of human-like diseases. Of course, we would expect that the results of research projects with these animals are then being published online free of charge as a service to mankind. The publication describing this medical breakthrough happened yesterday. It was published online, and you can get the details on our website, the website of our research institute, drrathresearch.org, and we'll forward you the link from there. Finally, I would like to acknowledge those scientists who were instrumental in developing this valuable animal model and who carried out the experiments I was privileged to present today. John Jha was the project leader and worked together with Dr. Ivanov, Dr. Rumi, and others. The entire project was carried out under the auspices of Dr. Nitzwicki, the head of our research institute. John, would you please stand up for a moment? I'm concluding my presentation by summarizing our new understanding of human cardiovascular disease. First, scurvy and hemorrhagic blood loss through the scorbutic blood vessel walls were the greatest threat to the survival of the human race after the loss of vitamin C synthesis in our ancestors. Second, a genetic mutation, lipoprotein A, that saved the human race from extinction due to epidemic scurvy, turned into a leading cause of death today for modern men, namely cardiovascular disease. Third, as long as the genetic mutation, namely the replacement of vitamin C by lipoprotein A, that happened under the tremendous evolutionary pressure of extinction from scurvy, as long as these switches were not understood, there was no possibility for mankind to rid itself of the cardiovascular epidemic. Our new understanding is that optimum dietary supply of vitamins and other micronutrients stabilize the artery walls, thereby rendering the deposition of lipoprotein A and the formation of atherosclerotic plaques obsolete. This will enable us to greatly prevent cardiovascular disease today and make them largely unknown in future generations. Understanding scurvy as the biggest threat to the survival of the human race, understanding this event in the past, is the key to the eradication of cardiovascular disease today and in the future. Thank you for your attention.